What if I told you that the greatest threat to your virtue, your peace, and the very integrity of your soul is not found in the unpredictable upheavals of life? Not in death, not in poverty, not even in the betrayal of fate, but rather in the silent, unnoticed influence of those you choose to surround yourself with. That is the essence of one of the most profound warnings embedded within the Stoic tradition. The people you keep closest to your life, those whose words echo in your mind, and whose behavior subtly shapes your own, can either elevate your existence toward virtue or drag you down, slowly, imperceptibly, into vice, confusion, distraction, and, ultimately, moral decay. It is not an exaggeration to say that this is the most critical, the most consequential, and the most underappreciated factor in a Stoic's pursuit of the good life. The Stoics, those stern yet compassionate architects of inner freedom, understood human nature with a clarity that still pierces through the centuries. Marcus Aurelius, ruler of the known world, penned his meditations not as imperial decrees, but as reminders to himself, cautioning against the easy corruption that proximity to the wrong people could inflict even on an emperor. Associate with those who will make you better, Seneca advised in his letters, and welcome those whom you yourself can improve. But the implication runs deeper than mere selective friendship. It points to the fundamental Stoic recognition that human beings are inherently imitative creatures. We absorb the habits, opinions, and emotional responses of those around us, not always consciously, but often in the most subtle and insidious ways, like ink seeping into water. Thus, the company we keep is not a matter of social preference, but of philosophical necessity. For the Stoic, it is a matter of survival, not the survival of the body, which is indifferent, but of the soul, which is all important. If our ultimate goal is to live according to nature, in harmony with reason and virtue, then anything that threatens to distort our judgment, to erode our discipline, or to foster within us base desires must be held at a distance, regardless of how socially acceptable, entertaining, or even pleasurable that influence might be. The Stoic therefore enumerates, with painstaking clarity, the kinds of people from whom one must steer clear, not out of disdain, but out of love. Love for virtue, for clarity, for self-mastery. The first of these is the chronic complainer, the individual for whom life is a ceaseless sequence of offenses, who sees the unfolding of events not as neutral facts to be accepted and engaged with wisely, but as a series of personal attacks, injustices, and wounds. To spend time in the presence of such a person is to be slowly initiated into the cult of resentment, to internalize their posture of passive victimhood, and to increasingly interpret your own life through the distorted lens of grievance. The Stoic knows that life offers no guarantees, that misfortune and discomfort are part of the human condition, and that wisdom consists not in lamenting these facts, but in mastering oneself despite them. The chronic complainer, by contrast, is an evangelist of helplessness, a priest of powerlessness, whose influence is more dangerous than outright hostility because it is cloaked in the guise of shared experience and empathetic bonding. To sit with a chronic complainer is to practice daily the inversion of Stoic resilience. Their constant sighs, their ceaseless enumeration of slights and injuries teach not gratitude, but ingratitude, not adaptability, but rigidity, not serenity, but turmoil. They shift the mind's attention away from what is within one's control, attitude, perception, choice, and fixate it obsessively on what lies without, other people's decisions, random inconveniences, the weather, the past. In this way, the chronic complainer is not merely annoying, they are corrosive. They erode the Stoic's core discipline, the wise distinction between what is up to us and what is not. Hence, the Stoic must, with compassionate but unyielding firmness, establish boundaries, not as an act of superiority, but as an act of philosophical hygiene, protecting one's soul from infection by habits that are inimical to virtue. Yet, there is another, even more dangerous type, the flatterer. If the chronic complainer threatens your equanimity by encouraging you to see yourself as a victim, the flatterer threatens your integrity by encouraging you to see yourself as a hero, regardless of whether you have earned such esteem. The Stoic is committed to the ruthless pursuit of self-knowledge, to peeling away the illusions of ego and pride in order to live in accordance with reason and truth. But the flatterer is an architect of delusion. They offer praise not as an honest reflection of your character, but as a tool of manipulation, a way to endear themselves to you or to secure your favor. Seneca warned frequently about the perils of excessive praise, noting how it feeds the basest instincts of self-satisfaction and self-deception. To accept flattery is to accept a counterfeit currency. It feels like wealth, but it impoverishes the soul. The Stoic must therefore learn to be wary not only of those who criticize unjustly, but also of those who praise too easily. True friends, as the Stoics understood, correct you when you are wrong and applaud you only when you have acted virtuously, not when you have simply succeeded or achieved fame or fortune, which are indifferent to the wise person. The flatterer, by contrast, seduces you into measuring your worth by external approval rather than internal consistency, leading you inexorably away from the Stoic path of virtue. The third type to be vigilantly avoided is the perpetual distractor. This is not the person who, out of necessity or circumstance, occasionally pulls you away from your pursuits, but the one for whom distraction is a lifestyle, an identity, a worldview. The Stoic disciplines his mind to be present, focused, and engaged in purposeful activity. His ideal is not a life of frenetic movement, but one of deliberate action guided by reason. But the distractor cannot abide stillness. They seek out novelty, entertainment, and stimulation as ends in themselves, not as tools for education or relaxation, but as means of avoiding the discomfort of introspection. To associate closely with a distractor is to risk adopting their habits of scattered attention and superficial engagement. The Stoic knows that time is the most precious resource, the one thing that cannot be reclaimed once squandered, and therefore he is vigilant in guarding his hours and days against the encroachment of trivialities. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "People seek retreats for themselves, in the country, by the sea, in the mountains. But there is nowhere that a man can find a more peaceful and trouble-free retreat than in his own mind." The distractor, however, is a refugee from his own mind, perpetually fleeing from inner stillness into the noise of the external world. The Stoic must avoid being drawn into this flight, for it is a flight from virtue itself. The fourth type is the habitual cynic. Unlike the healthy skeptic who questions assumptions in pursuit of truth, the cynic dismisses all ideals as illusions and all efforts toward virtue as naive. The Stoic understands that while humanity is imperfect, it is also capable of extraordinary wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. The cynic, by contrast, regards all such virtues as mere facades masking the self-interest and corruption that he assumes to be universal. To associate with such a person is to risk having one's moral ambition slowly undermined by their relentless skepticism. to have one's desire to live nobly eroded by their insistence that such efforts are meaningless. Seneca reminds us that it is better to light a single candle than to curse the darkness. But the Cynic scoffs at candles, arguing that the darkness is all there is, and that those who believe otherwise are fools. The Stoic must resist the seduction of such despair, recognizing that while cynicism may masquerade as wisdom, it is in fact a surrender to apathy and a rejection of the human capacity for improvement and transcendence. The fifth type, the manipulator, wields influence with precision and malice, bending others to their will through deceit, guilt, and psychological coercion. The Stoic's ultimate aim is the cultivation of autonomy, the establishment of an inner citadel from which one's thoughts, decisions, and actions emerge in accordance with reason and virtue, unshaken by external forces. The manipulator, however, seeks to breach this citadel, not through open attack, but through subtle undermining, making you question your values, your perceptions, and your judgments, until you find yourself acting in service of their interests rather than your own principles. It is for this reason that the Stoic must be ever vigilant against manipulation, cultivating not only self-awareness, but also a discerning eye for the red flags of emotional coercion. The manipulator's power lies in their ability to exploit the unexamined areas of your psyche, your insecurities, your desires for approval, your fears of rejection. The Stoic, through daily reflection and philosophical practice, seeks to minimize these vulnerabilities, fortifying the self against such insidious invasions. The reckless enthusiast represents the sixth perilous type, the one who confuses recklessness with courage and who seeks to draw you into their ill-considered ventures. The Stoic prizes courage, yes, but courage tempered by prudence, guided by wisdom, and aimed at virtuous ends. Recklessness, by contrast, is courage's degenerate cousin, action undertaken without reflection, without regard for consequences, and often for the sake of thrill rather than purpose. To associate closely with the reckless is to risk being swept up in their impulsive schemes, to substitute their adrenaline-fueled spontaneity for your own reasoned judgment. The Stoic must remember that the highest good is not excitement, but virtue, not the transient thrill of risk, but the enduring satisfaction of having acted rightly. Finally, the Envious Saboteur embodies the most covert and insidious form of harmful association. Unlike the Flatterer, who showers you with false praise, or the Manipulator, who seeks to control you overtly, the Envious Saboteur undermines you from the shadows. They resent your successes, diminish your achievements, and subtly plant seeds of doubt and self-criticism within your mind. Their aim is not to destroy you outright, but to corrode your confidence and to ensure that you never rise so high that their own mediocrity is thrown into sharper relief. The Stoic, grounded in self-knowledge and philosophical clarity, recognizes that the only opinion that ultimately matters is that of his own reasoned judgment. But even the Stoic is not immune to the effects of persistent undermining by those who claim to be friends but act as foes. Therefore, he must be discerning in identifying and distancing himself from those whose envy manifests in sabotage, ensuring that his path toward virtue is not obstructed by the toxic projections of those unwilling to confront their own inadequacies. The Stoic's journey does not end with the recognition of harmful traits in others. Rather, it deepens, turns inward, and demands that we examine the more insidious, the more dangerous reality. That these very same traits, the ones we so readily spot in others, often lie dormant or active within ourselves. the chronic complainer, the manipulator, the flatterer, the distractor, the cynic, the reckless, and the envious are not only external threats but internal potentials, facets of the human psyche that can, if left unexamined, subtly guide our actions and quietly corrode our virtue from within. This is perhaps the most humbling and most demanding aspect of Stoicism. Its insistence that the most vigilant scrutiny be directed not outward, but inward. The Stoic does not seek to purify the world of vice before he has purified himself, for he knows that he cannot shield himself from the malice of others if he is already betraying himself through his own undisciplined thoughts and unchecked passions. Let us begin with the chronic complainer. How easy it is to shake our heads at those who find grievance in every event, who interpret life's ordinary frustrations as personal injustices, and who seem to thrive on the nourishment of self-pity. But how often, if we are honest, do we engage in the same pattern of thought? How often do we indulge the reflexive sigh, the grumble beneath the breath, the whispered curse against the traffic, the weather, the unexpected turn of events that disrupts our fragile expectations? The Stoic does not deny that life will at times be uncomfortable, inconvenient, even painful. But he trains himself to meet these moments with equanimity, seeing them as opportunities to exercise resilience and wisdom rather than as occasions to cultivate resentment. To recognize the chronic complainer within is to undertake the difficult but necessary practice of reframing one's inner narrative. The next time you feel the familiar tug of complaint, when the day does not unfold as planned, when someone fails to meet your expectations, when the world asserts its indifference to your desires, pause, breathe, and ask, is this truly an injustice, or simply the way of things? Does lamenting this situation serve my growth, or does it sap my energy and clarity? The Stoic knows that complaint is often little more than disguised helplessness, an expression of a desire for the world to be other than it is, and an abdication of the responsibility to adapt and respond wisely. In this way, recognizing and extinguishing the inner complainer is not an act of suppression but of liberation, freeing oneself from the exhausting cycle of frustration and disappointment that inevitably follows from demanding that reality conform to one's preferences. Next comes the flatterer, whose presence we rightly guard against in our social circles, but whose voice we often tolerate within the confines of our own mind. There is a part of each of us that seeks comfort in self-congratulation, that is eager to magnify our minor virtues into grand achievements, and to minimize or ignore our failings in order to preserve a fragile sense of self-worth. This inner flatterer is dangerous precisely because it speaks in the tone of reassurance, encouraging complacency, and discouraging the rigorous self-examination that Stoicism demands. Seneca's insistence on the necessity of honest self-appraisal is a timeless corrective to this inner seduction. The first step towards amendment, he writes, is the recognition of error. If we are forever coddled by our own internal flatterer, we will never confront the aspects of ourselves that require correction, and thus we will remain trapped in a state of arrested moral development, mistaking the appearance of virtue for its reality. The Stoic counters this tendency through the practice of daily reflection, a deliberate and disciplined examination of one's thoughts, actions, and motives, undertaken not with the harshness of self-condemnation, but with the clarity and integrity of one who is committed above all to truth. And what of the perpetual distractor? Here too, the external critique so easily becomes an internal diagnosis. In an age where distraction is the default state, where attention is constantly fragmented by the lure of novelty and the convenience of technology. The risk of becoming one's own distractor is omnipresent. The Stoic insists that attention is the foundation of virtue. Without the ability to focus one's mind, to direct one's energy toward purposeful action, and to resist the siren call of trivial diversions, one cannot hope to live according to reason. The distractor within us is the voice that says, "This task can wait," or "Let me check my messages just one more time," or "I will begin my discipline tomorrow." It is the force that pulls us away from the difficult but necessary work of cultivating virtue and tempts us with the ease of passive consumption and superficial engagement. To overcome this internal distractor requires the cultivation of deliberate habits of attention. The Stoic practices mindfulness not as a fashionable technique but as a philosophical imperative, training the mind to remain present with what is essential and to resist being dissipated by the endless stream of stimuli that modern life provides. This means setting boundaries around one's use of technology, creating spaces of solitude and reflection, and committing to routines that foster depth rather than superficiality. The Stoic is not a Luddite, rejecting all innovation, but he is discerning, ensuring that his tools serve his values rather than undermining them. The inner cynic presents perhaps the most formidable challenge, for it often disguises itself as wisdom. After all, who among us has not, at some point, recoiled from disappointment or betrayal by adopting a posture of guarded pessimism, convincing ourselves that to expect little is to be protected from pain? The Stoic recognizes that such cynicism is not a shield but a shackle, one that constrains the capacity for hope, for love, for genuine engagement with the world. Cynicism may spare us the vulnerability of aspiration, but it also deprives us of the joy of striving, the nobility of pursuing the good despite the inevitability of failure. To confront the inner cynic is to reclaim the courage to hope, not in the naive sense of expecting that all will go as one wishes, but in the deeper, Stoic sense of committing to the pursuit of virtue regardless of external outcomes. It is to say, with Epictetus, that while I may not control what happens, I always control how I respond, and I choose to respond with integrity, with effort, and with the steadfast refusal to allow the failures and betrayals of others to dictate the quality of my own character. The inner manipulator is no less dangerous, for it tempts us to abandon authenticity in favor of control, to shape our words and actions not in accordance with truth, but in accordance with what we believe will secure the approval, admiration, or compliance of others. This tendency is often rationalized as strategic communication, but at its core, it is a betrayal of the Stoic commitment to honesty and congruence between inner conviction and outer expression. The manipulator within is the voice that says, "Tell them what they want to hear," or "Present yourself in this way to gain advantage," even when such tactics require the distortion or concealment of one's true beliefs. The Stoics' antidote to this internal manipulation is the cultivation of integrity as a non-negotiable principle. To live with integrity is to align one's thoughts, words, and actions consistently with one's values, regardless of the social or material consequences. It is to prioritize the health of one's soul over the expediencies of circumstance, recognizing that the only true power worth having is the power over oneself, not over others. The reckless enthusiast within us is the impulsive urge to leap before looking, to act for the sake of acting, to mistake movement for progress and risk for courage. This inner voice glamorizes spontaneity and derides caution as cowardice, encouraging decisions made in haste and devoid of thoughtful deliberation. The Stoic tempers this internal recklessness with the practice of premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, a reflective exercise in anticipating potential obstacles, risks, and consequences before taking action. Now, some exciting news. Our channel now offers a members club. By joining it, you'll unlock exclusive benefits, deeper content dives, and personal insights. Join us on this journey, and let's build a meaningful life together. And I also humbly ask you to leave a comment, as it helps my channel immensely. If you do not know what to comment, just write better every day, so I know you reached this far. And don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Also, I've linked some books on Stoicism that helped me become the man I am today, and will also help you achieve a Stoic mindset. By systematically considering what could go wrong, the Stoic inoculates himself against the seductive pull of recklessness, ensuring that his courage is grounded in reason rather than in the fleeting intoxication of impulse. This does not render him paralyzed by fear, but fortifies him with the prudence necessary to act wisely and effectively in the pursuit of virtuous ends. Finally, the envious saboteur lurks within the darker corners of our psyche, manifesting as resentment toward those who possess qualities, achievements, or fortunes that we ourselves desire but lack. This internal envy corrodes the capacity for joy, poisons relationships with bitterness, and undermines the Stoic's commitment to equanimity and self-sufficiency. The Stoic understands that envy arises from a misguided focus on external goods, wealth, status, beauty, which are indifferent to the wise person and ultimately beyond our complete control. To confront and overcome the inner saboteur, the Stoic practices the discipline of gratitude and the reframing of comparisons. Rather than measuring oneself against others, the Stoic measures progress against his own prior state, asking not, "Am I better than them?" but, "Am I better than I was yesterday?" This internal standard fosters contentment, resilience, and a healthy orientation toward self-improvement rather than self-undermining comparison. Thus, the Stoic, in turning the lens inward, embarks upon the most challenging but most rewarding of all philosophical endeavors: the rigorous and relentless cultivation of self-awareness, the identification and correction of internal vices, and the disciplined commitment to living in accordance with virtue not only in outward conduct, but in the hidden recesses of thought and motive. This is the path not to perfection, which is beyond human capacity, but to progress, which is always within reach for those who choose the Stoic way. The culmination of the Stoic's caution toward the 7 types of people, both external and internal, does not lead to isolation nor to misanthropy, but rather to the highest expression of human wisdom: the art of choosing one's associations with deliberate care while simultaneously cultivating within oneself the resilience and virtue necessary to thrive amidst an imperfect world. For the Stoic does not flee from humanity. He does not retreat from the duties of society, nor does he withdraw in bitterness or disdain for his fellow man. Instead, he engages deeply, purposefully, but always with discernment, knowing that the soul is a precious vessel, easily influenced, easily swayed, and therefore requiring vigilant protection against corrosive associations that might divert it from the path of virtue. The fundamental insight here is one that resounds through all Stoic texts and echoes profoundly in the meditations of Marcus Aurelius: that it is not events, not fortune, not even other people that shape our fate, but our judgments about these things and our voluntary associations with them. The Stoic understands that to let another close, to allow their words to settle in your mind, their habits to rub against your own, their moods to modulate your emotional equilibrium, is an act of profound vulnerability and, therefore, of immense responsibility. Proximity is power. It can elevate or diminish, fortify or weaken, clarify or confuse. And so the Stoic does not move through life carelessly, embracing whomever circumstance throws into his path. He selects, with the same care that an artist selects his tools or a warrior his weapons, those with whom he will spend his time, those whom he will allow to shape, even in the subtlest ways, his unfolding character. But mastery in this domain is not a matter of building walls so thick that no influence can penetrate. The Stoic is not a misanthrope. He does not shun humanity, nor does he refuse to offer his compassion, his assistance, or his wisdom to those who lack virtue. On the contrary, he recognizes that part of living according to nature is fulfilling one's social obligations, contributing to the common good, and practicing the virtues of justice and benevolence toward all. Yet he does so without surrendering his autonomy, without permitting himself to be swept into the habits, vices, and confusions of those who have not yet undertaken, or who have actively rejected, the labor of self-cultivation. Thus, his relationships are characterized by a delicate balance: open-heartedness coupled with clear-sightedness, compassion without complicity, engagement without entanglement. To live in this way requires first the capacity for accurate discernment. The Stoic trains himself to perceive not merely the surface behaviors of those around him, but the underlying patterns of thought and habit that animate those behaviors. He looks beyond charm, beyond eloquence, beyond the superficial displays of virtue that so often mask deeper vices, and instead attunes himself to the consistency of character, to the congruence between words and actions, and to the way in which a person responds to adversity, to power, to pleasure, and to pain. For it is in these moments, not in the ease of ordinary interactions, that a person's true disposition is revealed. The Stoic knows that the 7 types, the complainer, the flatterer, the distractor, the cynic, the manipulator, the reckless, and the envious, do not always wear clear labels. They often present themselves as friends, as allies, as companions on the path. They may even appear, at times, to share one's values and aspirations. But over time, through repeated observation and reflection, their true nature becomes apparent. The complainer cannot help but return again and again to the litany of grievances that define their worldview. The flatterer cannot resist the opportunity to offer praise where none is warranted. The distractor perpetually seeks novelty and avoids depth. The cynic sneers at efforts toward improvement. The manipulator bends interactions to serve their hidden agendas. The reckless rushes headlong without forethought. And the envious, though perhaps silent at first, eventually reveals their resentment through subtle acts of sabotage or passive-aggressive commentary. Thus, the Stoic cultivates patience in judgment, resisting the temptation to categorize too hastily, but also refusing to ignore the accumulating evidence that reveals a person's habitual orientation toward life. And once discernment has clarified the nature of the relationship, the Stoic acts accordingly, not with cruelty, not with dramatic severance, but with quiet and firm realignment of boundaries. He does not need to announce his withdrawal or to condemn the other. He simply chooses to direct his time, energy, and presence elsewhere, toward those relationships that nourish virtue, support reasoned discourse, and foster mutual growth. Yet it is not enough merely to distance oneself from harmful influences. The Stoic must also actively seek out and cultivate relationships that serve as catalysts for his own moral development. Here, again, Seneca offers guidance. Associate with those who will make you better. This is not a passive process, but an intentional practice. The Stoic seeks friendships grounded in shared commitment to virtue, in mutual accountability, and in the willingness to both offer and receive honest feedback. He chooses companions who challenge him to rise above his weaknesses, who exemplify qualities he aspires to cultivate, and who support him in the ongoing labor of self-improvement. Moreover, the Stoic recognizes that just as he is vulnerable to influence, so too is he an influence upon others. Therefore, he assumes responsibility for the kind of presence he brings to his relationships. He endeavors to be for others what he seeks in them, a source of stability, of encouragement, of honest reflection, and of virtuous example. In this way, the Stoic not only protects his own soul, but contributes to the moral elevation of his community, embodying the social dimension of Stoic ethics that sees personal virtue as inseparable from civic contribution. At the same time, the Stoic remains acutely aware of the limits of his influence. He does not labor under the illusion that he can reform the manipulator, convert the cynic, or cure the envious saboteur through sheer force of will, or through the persuasive power of his example alone. He knows that virtue must be chosen freely and cultivated through personal effort. Therefore, while he remains willing to offer guidance when sought and compassion when appropriate, he does not entangle himself in the futile project of rescuing those who have no desire to be rescued, nor does he permit their resistance or hostility to disturb his own equanimity. This balanced approach, combining discernment, intentional association, personal responsibility, and acceptance of the limits of influence, constitutes the Stoic mastery of selective association. It transforms what might otherwise be a reactive, haphazard navigation of social life into a deliberate practice of aligning one's relationships with one's deepest values and highest aspirations. Importantly, this practice extends beyond personal relationships to the broader social environments one inhabits, professional contexts, community engagements, and even the cultural narratives one consumes. The Stoic applies the same criteria of discernment here, recognizing that the values and behaviors reinforced in these spheres can shape, for better or worse, one's character and worldview. Thus, he chooses workplaces that, insofar as possible, align with his ethical commitments. He participates in communities that support rather than undermine his pursuit of virtue, and he curates his engagement with cultural narratives, books, media, art, to ensure that these inputs cultivate wisdom rather than confuse it. Yet, perhaps the most profound expression of the Stoic's mastery in this domain is his ultimate reliance upon his own internal compass, rather than upon the approval, companionship, or validation of others. For while he recognizes the importance of virtuous association, he also acknowledges the necessity of solitude, the value of withdrawing at times into his own mind, where he can reflect, recalibrate, and recommit to his philosophical path without distraction. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." This cultivated capacity for solitude ensures that the Stoic's well-being does not depend upon the presence or absence of others, but rests securely upon the foundation of his own reasoned judgment and principled action. It allows him to engage in relationships freely, generously, and without fear, knowing that his core integrity remains intact regardless of external circumstances. Thus, we arrive at the end of this long reflection, recognizing that the Stoics' caution about the 7 types of people is not a rejection of human connection, but a call to engage in it wisely, purposefully, and virtuously. It is an invitation to take seriously the profound influence that our associations exert upon our character and to assume responsibility for shaping those associations in ways that support rather than subvert our highest aims. In this, as in all things, the Stoic pursues progress, not perfection. He knows that he will occasionally misjudge, that he may sometimes allow harmful influences closer than he should, and that he may at times fail to live up to his own standards of discernment and integrity. But he also knows that each misstep is an opportunity for reflection, for recalibration, and for renewed commitment to the path of wisdom. Ultimately, the Stoic's goal is not merely to avoid harm, but to cultivate a life of flourishing, a life in which his relationships, his environment, and his internal dispositions are harmoniously aligned with the pursuit of virtue. And in achieving this alignment, he embodies the highest aspiration of Stoicism: to live in accordance with nature, guided by reason, fortified by resilience, and ennobled by the unwavering pursuit of the good. Now, if any part of this message has been helpful to you, leave us your like and comment, helping the algorithm recommend it to someone who needs it at this time. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new videos. And if you look through the videos we've already uploaded, you're sure to find something to take with you. Have a good day.